Joining me this week is a podcaster, a commentator, a former member of one of the Marines' most elite units, and the host of the aptly titled Jason Stapleton program. Jason Stapleton, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I could have worn the same exact thing as you. We could have been in a fashion disaster to start this thing.
We should have done it. It would have been great.
I could change right now.
If you,
would that be weird?
No, it's all right.
Could you handle the show for the first 20 minutes or so?
Well, people have made comments that we look similar, so
yeah.
it might be confusing to the audience.
Your hair's a little flatter.
It is a little,
That's
yeah.
the main difference here. All right, I am glad we're doing this because we got a lot to talk about, and you've had me on your show, and we've sort of been on each other's maps for quite some time.
Yeah.
So let's start with your history, which I think is really interesting. Let's talk Marines first before we get into politics. Or actually, before we even get into Marines, tell me a bit about growing up and where you're from and how that sort of shaped some of your political.
Well, I'm from the Midwest, and so I grew up there to a conservative household, Christian conservative household, and parents were divorced at 16, and we moved to Kansas City, where I now ended up living, of all places, considering the amount of places I've traveled to, and I joined the Marine Corps the day after I graduated from high school. So I went from there, and then life continued after that.
Yeah. So did you have any interest in politics in those early years before you were in the Marines, high school?
You know, my father once asked me, he said, who's running for president? Because he'd read some article that 80% of the people didn't know who was running for president, and I knew who it was. And I don't know if that was because my father followed politics or because I had some sort of interest in it from the beginning. But I don't think, other than how it affected my life, I don't know politics really had a place for me for a lot of years. At least not until I got out of the Marines.
Yeah.
So it was my early 20s before I ever even considered it.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Marines. You
Okay.
go into the Marines. Was that just sort of you wanted to figure out what to do with your life? Is that something that you really wanted to do before that? How did that happen?
My father used to take me camping when I was a kid, and I think if he could have been in the military, he would have been. He had bad ankles, and so I always had a kind of gravitated towards that kind of stuff. And when I got out of high school, one of the things I knew was I didn't want to go to school anymore, and I knew I wanted to get out of town.
Yeah.
So the quickest way out of town was into the Marines, and so I joined the Marine Corps, and that was, I wasn't sure, I just knew I wanted to travel. I knew I wanted to be somewhere else other than Kansas.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to end up in a school somewhere studying because frankly, I was a mediocre student at best. Not necessarily, I don't know if it was because I didn't have the intelligence, it was more I didn't have the drive. Mm-hmm. And so rather than spend a bunch of money I didn't have, because we were not a rich family, the Marine Corps seemed like a logical option.
Yeah. And then it did take you all over the world.
It did. It took me everywhere. Yeah. It took. I started out in an infantry unit, and I did that for a little while until I realized there's really nothing in an infantry unit. You're a bullet sponge. It's up he sees me, I'm down, rinse and repeat. Right? Charge the hill, charge the hill. So they had an indoctrination for a sniper unit, and anytime you want to get into a specialized unit, they make you indoc. Which is just a period of time where they put you through hell to see if you really want to be there or not. It's to test mental and physical ability. Mental more than physical. And so I went on this indoc, and there were like 40 people who tried out, and they took 4 of us. And so then I worked in a sniper team for about a year before we deployed to Okinawa. And there were 2 guys ahead of me and 4 guys that came with me for a sniper school quota, and I knew that it just wasn't going to happen in my first year. I was going to have to re-enlist. And so I ended up trying out for a force reconnaissance team. We indocked again in Okinawa with 5th Force Reconnaissance Battalion, and I was accepted into that unit. And I spent the remainder of my time doing that, kind of traveling around Asia and working mainly in hostage rescue, counterterrorism, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Why would we need snipers in a place like Okinawa?
Well,
like, is this just part of the sort of broader military scope?
Yeah,
we obviously have bases in Japan.
That's right. Yeah, we still have now. If the question is why do we have bases in Okinawa, that's a different question.
We can get to that when we shift to the Libertarian stuff in a few minutes.
But every unit has sniper capabilities in it because you need them as forward observers. They act as both forward observers and designated marksmen if they're needed for that. So in each unit, in each battalion, there's a group dedicated, a platoon dedicated for snipers.
Yeah.
So.
What's it like right when you show up for the Marines? Because we have all these ideas about the military and the Marines and the Navy and all this stuff, but it's mostly from movies, I think, is what most people think of these things. You say anything about the military to me, I think of the first half of Full Metal Jacket. Like that's my whole sort of.
It's a lot like that. It's not unlike that.
Yeah.
There's less swearing now because there's less physical violence with the drill instructors directly hitting or punching but it's all there, right? Mm-hmm. The idea of the Marine Corps and the difference between the Marine Corps and every other branch of service that I'm aware of is that most of the other branches of service try and take you where you are and build on that. So they're like, this is what I've got, let's build on what we've got. The Marine Corps wants to tear you all the way down. And so everything that you do from the time you get there is about erasing personal identity and stripping you of that. You are nothing, you are a Marine and only a Marine, and you are now reborn. And that is the entire process is mentally breaking you down. And so everything from when your feet hit they've got little yellow footprints. From the time your feet hit that, the very first thing you do is go in and you put everything you own into a box. And that box goes away. You get it back at the end of boot camp, but by then you're already reprogrammed.
Yeah. How long does that programming process take? I assume it's different for everybody. I mean, the length, the duration of the program is a certain amount of time, but not everybody's going to get there in the same amount of time.
Yeah, some people never get there, and they get kicked out. If they can't conform, then they'll do everything they can to make it happen. But if they can't, they say, well, you're non-conforming. They'll kick you out. But it takes 90 days. In psychology, you learn, and I learned this through trading and teaching people, it takes about 60 to 90 days to break a bad habit and another 60 to 90 days to reinstall a new habit. So if you're doing it on the quick immersion, you can probably get that done in 60 to 90 days, which is about what boot camp is, about 3 months long.
For a guy like you that's kind of an independent thinker and you like doing things your own way and all that, was that extremely difficult, or had you not even evolved?
No, I was drinking the Kool-Aid long before I went. Yeah, I was ready. I was fine with it. It's funny, my ideas about war and about politics and about what's right and moral have changed so dramatically over the last several years. As I've seen war really changes things, not just seeing war, but also I got to see a different side of war because I was not only in it, but I worked for and assisted the diplomatic side of things. So when you're working on that end of it, you get to see what is the State Department really doing? What is the DOD really doing? Not the troops on the ground who are out running patrols. What are the generals talking about? Mm-hmm. What's the overall mission? And you get to see a bigger picture of what's happening, and what I saw was something I didn't like.
You didn't like it just because of the bureaucracy of it, or the directions that things were going? You're talking about Iraq.
Yeah, Iraq, Afghanistan.
Right?
Yeah, you can extend it into Syria and Egypt and all those other places. But
in terms of places you've been.
Yes, Iraq, right? Afghanistan, both. Yeah. So this is the thing. When you're in the Marines, the idea and what they sell you on is you are here defending American liberty. You are the force that protects the freedoms that we hold dear. And I drank that in, and I believed it. Mm-hmm. Marines don't lie, cheat, or steal, these types of things. Now that's ridiculous. Marines are some of the, some terrible people in many cases.
You got to do what you got to do.
Well, it takes all kinds, let's put it that way. But I drank this idea that we are here to protect, to be that line of defense. And what you find out when you actually end up in war is that that's not what it is. That it's a money-making scheme, that it's a lot of people at state and justifying their jobs, and a lot of contractors making a lot of money off of the process and doing everything that they can to ensure that the process continues as long as humanly possible. I'll give you an example, and I'm not exactly sure how much I can talk about, but I'm going to talk about all of it anyway because I don't care.
Nobody's watching this.
Wait, nobody. Yeah, right.
This is just us.
But I'll give you an example. So when I was in Iraq, one of the first stations I had was in Mosul, and I went there because 4 guys had been killed in a vehicle IED 2 days before. So I go up there to replace one of the 4 guys who'd been killed. And our job was protecting diplomats who were part of the provincial reconstruction team. They're building roads and bridges and waterway and drilling wells and things like that.
So in a weird way, this is the good old days of Iraq. This is right in like this is the war had already happened, but now they were trying to rebuild.
Well, this is 2004, 2005 period. Yeah, just to give everybody a framework. So but Mosul was one of the most dangerous places in Iraq at that time. Something like 21 IEDs a day were going off in the city.
Wow.
So we spent a lot of time running from forward operating bases down to Parliament so that our diplomats could talk to their diplomats. And everything is done in cash. So you're bringing these big, in many cases, big amounts of cash back and forth to pay for these projects. Well, then these guys would have to go out and survey the roads that were supposed to be being built and the progress and the wells that were being dug. And I can remember taking one of these guys out to a road east of the city that was they were supposed to be laying pavement onto it. And it really wasn't even started yet. They'd managed to kind of flatten the road out, but none of the work had been done. And essentially we were just transferring money from American taxpayers to this other group and to this Iraqi group. And the question was, well, how do we get this money spent?
Yeah.
Right, we've got this money, we got to get it spent on something, and this is it was a perpetual process of us taking money from people who'd rightfully earned it and then giving it to a country so that they could essentially squander it. And I started to realize at that point, look, what are we doing here? What is this really about? It's not about protecting American liberty. It's not even about providing democracy to the Iraqi people. It's about something else. And it really put a distaste in my mouth and really showed the difference between what I believed I was doing and what I was really doing.
Yeah. Do you think two things could be true there at the same time, that had democracy worked there? Because there was that year where they had free elections when we were still there and things were actually turning around. I've talked about this with a bunch of different guests. Could both of those things have worked at the same time? That whatever our machine is, whatever the money-making machine and the military thing, but at the same time we could have brought true freedom, which obviously hasn't worked now.
I think you're quite possibly so. Here's the one caveat I would make is that I assumed as an American that everyone wanted liberty, that this was just an innate desire that we have as mankind, men and women, that we have a desire to be free. What I found in the Middle East is that wasn't the case. I can remember sitting with an interpreter, a man who later moved here to America to protect himself and his family. And he did more as an Iraqi to protect us while we were there than probably anybody else. We got more good intel from him. He put his life on the line every day to help us accomplish our mission in Iraq. And I was sitting against a Humvee while we were outside Parliament one day. And he said to me that these people need a dictator. They need someone to tell them what to do. And I was very angry at the time that he would say that. I said, what are we here fighting for? What do you believe? Because you claim to be for our mission, but you don't claim to support democracy and more importantly, liberty. And the fact is, there is a huge difference between between democracy and liberty. Democracy is just, hey, we get to decide on what kind of tyrant we want. And liberty is a principle that says, I have a right to be free, a belief in self-ownership. And there's us spreading liberty, spreading democracy to a group that doesn't believe fundamentally in liberty will always end in some sort of tyranny.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible that it's not that they don't believe in liberty, but they haven't been afforded the opportunities in terms of education and a worldliness that unfortunately we in the West seem to take for granted now more than ever? So if they had just gotten that, the education first, then the next step of, oh, this is why liberty is important, this is why I want it, and now here's how I want to build a democracy. Like, is that how we have to start, perhaps?
I think it's very interesting that you bring that up, because I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing our liberties slip away here in America, is because there's been a lack of education. You have to teach someone why it works in order for them to understand. What you're doing here on this show and the success that you've had in trying to get at principles and ideas and promote those is what's going to cause the critical change in America if we're going to see one. And I think that one of the big problems in the Middle East is that they've never known what it is, so they can't understand it. And
so that even if we built the proper institutions for them, that the underpinning of really understanding the philosophical stuff wouldn't be strong enough to keep that
I don't know, and the question that I always ask is why is it our responsibility to do it?
Yeah.
And I would say if you believe in those types of things, well then you have a right and a responsibility, if not the obligation, to try and to give what you have and to try and convince as many other people as possible to do the same thing.
Yeah.
But you don't have the right to take from somebody else. Our government has no business being over there building countries and spreading democracy, because as we've seen in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, we don't know what we're doing. We only make the problem worse.
Yeah, the Afghanistan one, which I probably should be spending more time talking about, not only me, but everybody should, is now I think our longest war ever.
Yeah.
Every day of Obama's presidency was at war with Afghanistan. It continues now. I don't think anyone has a clue, at least publicly, as to what we're actually doing there at this point. We're not trying to make them a democracy, right? Well, the idea was we were trying to disrupt Al-Qaeda. Yeah. That seems sort of archaic and almost irrelevant at this point. I mean, we're just doing this endless thing that can never end.
No, you're right. And there's no clear idea of why we're there. What are we fighting to achieve? We've created an outpost there. And we will be there forever if that's what the government decides it wants to do. Because the same thing that you saw in Iraq after the surge when we pulled back is the same thing that will happen in Afghanistan. You will create a vacuum, and that vacuum will be filled by the most ruthless people that are in that area at that time.
Yeah.
And it really is sad, but it's just that this is not the way that you fight wars. Unfortunately, we have this idea in America that we need to fight winning. The winning of hearts and minds is important. And this is where I will deviate from many of the folks on the libertarian side of things, is that I'm not a pacifist. I think that we should stay out of war. The war is a violent and evil thing, and that we should stay out at all costs. But when it's time to fight, we are ruthless. I mean, we drive your women and children out into the cold, dark night, and we hang your men from the rafters. We do whatever we have to do to win as quickly as possible, to crush them, everything. Their desire and their ability to resist. This is how you win wars. Historically, that's how it's been done. Yeah. It's only until roughly Vietnam era that we decided that what we really needed to do was win the hearts and minds of the people. And what that has led to is one failure after another in American military policy.
Yeah, so you're into the Powell Doctrine, right? I mean, that's basically what you described there, that you just win it as quickly as possible, crush them, do what you have to do, and then move on. Which is ironic. Powell Doctrine? Well, I think that's what people say is the Powell Doctrine, but ironically, he had a lot to do with the Iraq War, and that's certainly not what we did there.
Well, and see, Powell, I think, disagreed with the Iraq War as well. If you break it, you buy it, if I remember right.
Right, but he was also telling us about uranium rods.
Yes, you're right. Exactly. That's true. No, you're right about that.
Yeah.
See, I knowing what I know now, what I understand about foreign policy and about the military, is I would have never advocated for going into that war. And I wouldn't advocate doing it again because American liberty isn't threatened. We have I think America has a responsibility to have a defensive military, something to protect our liberties. But we don't have the right to go and fight a war because of American interest. And that's what you hear politicians constantly talk about is, well, we've got American interests over there. Well, the interesting thing is that America will always find an interest where it wants to exert its power.
Yeah.
Every government will. So there has to be a higher standard than government need in order for us to, whether you're talking about Fourth Amendment right to privacy or unreasonable search and seizure, or whether you're talking about going to war.
Yeah, what do you make of the slow creep of all of this? That now we end up in wars that aren't even declared wars.
Yeah.
You know, we have drones in Pakistan right now. We're not at war with Pakistan, but I'm pretty sure if Pakistan had a drone flying over LA, people would consider that an act of war. We had major ships outside of Syria. We have military actions obviously happening in Syria, but we're not at war with Syria. What do you think what does that say about the state of the way our government is supposed to work? That, it used to be that Congress would authorize war, the president would sign it, and then we go to war. And now we've lost that.
Well, I think it's criminal is what I think it is. I think the government, the Congress has delegated its authority away. It doesn't have the constitutional ability to do that. Congress are a bunch of cowards is what they are.
Yeah.
Is that they come in and they claim that what you can take, I don't care what you want to talk about, we can stay on foreign policy because that's kind of what we're talking about, but what they decided to do was, we don't want to have to declare war and be on the record for declaring war, so what we'll do is we'll authorize the president to do whatever he thinks is right, and then we can complain about it or say that we supported it from the beginning.
Right.
Depending on how it all turns out. And there's a reason that...
Which is the biggest dereliction of duties they could possibly
Absolutely.
do. Because it's not just that they're not doing something, they're actually ceding power that
Yes.
they are supposed to have for checks and balances to another branch of government.
And I don't think that's... when they founded the country and wrote the Constitution, I don't think that's something they ever planned on or anticipated, is that people who had power would relinquish it. But their power is derived from the ability to be reelected. Mm-hmm. And so it's like the Republicans who promised us for 8 years that they were going to fix the Obamacare problems that we saw. And now we find out that what we're going to get is probably something worse. It's probably going to be worse for the people who are paying taxes and worse for the people receiving benefits.
Yeah.
They are absolutely some of the most spineless, cowardly people on the planet. It goes Congress, lawyers, which most of them are, used car salesmen, Forex traders.
Yeah, and I like that you're not making a distinction here between political parties,
No, I
because
don't.
they both do it, right? When the Republicans were controlling the House and Obama was president, they didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to work with them. Nobody did anything, and now people don't. The Democrats don't want to work with Trump. It's the same old thing.
Yeah, I think it's one things I like about your show is that it's not. There's not a political party attached to it. I think
they're both horrible.
we have, well, yeah.
I have some
yeah.
principles that I'm trying to believe in,
Exactly.
really.
And see, that's the difference, is that when you approach it from a principled position, you start to recognize that, hey, my team sucks.
Yeah.
I'm fond of saying, if you're a Republican, your party sucks. If you're a Democrat, your party sucks. If you have a party, that your party sucks.
Yeah.
They're not any good. And one of the problems that we have in America is that they've created two teams. We have the Capulets and the Montagues. Mm-hmm. And you associate yourself with one of those two teams, you wear their colors, and then you sort of view your job as defending and making excuses for your side and pointing out, well, the other side does the same thing, and back and forth. This is what guys like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, all these even commentators on the right have done for years.
Right.
Is they've established a team, and then their job every day is to go out and defend the team.
How did it work out for the kids with the Capulets and the Montagues?
Yeah,
It did not work out well, if I remember correctly.
And it won't work out well for us either. We're away from principle, and now we're bickering and fighting over things that frankly don't matter.
Yeah, and that's why I'm really trying to keep this about some principles, lay out some terms and some definitions and things like that. And then what the funny thing is that if you do that kind of thing, then people hate you from every side, because they can't even understand, wait a minute, you're not jumping to defend this or you're not jumping to defend that, but such is life.
But what is it for you? Like when you try and identify, this is what I believe, what is it?
Liberty.
But
Period.
what does that mean?
Freedom, your right to live your life as you see fit.
Okay.
Period. Live and let live. Now that doesn't mean we can't have a government, and I'm glad you asked that, because now we can shift into some of your libertarian beliefs. I believe in human liberty, that it is that through my mind I will figure out what is the best life to live for myself, and through that I will live the best life that probably will be for my neighbors, and I won't pollute my local river just because I can, and I will try to find work that will be rewarding to me, and then I can use my money to hire other people to do things, and all of those things about liberty, which I now believe is simply the most important thing.
So, but it's as much a personal philosophy of how you live your life as much as it is a political philosophy.
Yeah, I think it's the former first.
Yeah.
I think that's more important. We start here. You start in your mind, and then you go out from there. The other way would be, well, I guess the other way is collectivism, right? The other way is...
Yeah, the other extreme would be collectivism.
Yeah.
Where one person or a group of people decide what everybody else is going to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So the funny thing about the word liberty is it's been so associated with either libertarianism or conservatism or things that are thought of as on the right, where it very much is a liberal principle.
Yes.
To live and let live is liberal. It is not progressive, and it's not left, as I've been trying to make some point of over the last 2 years or so. I think it's doing an okay job of it. But when did that idea, that concept of liberty, really hit you? So that, I guess it was all within this. It was within being at war and
it was actually when I was there. I was trading currencies, and so I'm studying markets, and I'm studying currencies. Has a lot to do with what's happening with central banks and the political decisions that governments make. Those affect currency prices as much as anything else. And so I'm in a deep study in trying to understand, all right, when the central bank raises rates, what happens to the currency? Why does it do that? When a government decides that it's going to raise taxes or something like that, what is the effect on currency markets? Because I wanted to make money at it. And I ended up reading a book by Ron Paul called A Manifesto, The Revolution, a Manifesto. And I thought Ron Paul was this crazy old man because when I saw him on TV, I was just like, all right, that guy says some cool things, but he's really a kook.
Yeah.
And I read his book, and it was one of the most coherent ideas about liberty that I'd ever read. Basically, if someone had gotten into my head, had laid out everything that I was thinking, but couldn't articulate and put it into a book, it was in that book. And I drank it in. I said, this is what's wrong with the war. This is what's wrong with what's happening in our government. And I saw a solution. And so naturally, I continued my education, and that takes you down all kinds of crazy routes to very extreme ideas. And that's really where that came from, was realizing that I was being lied to, that we were hurting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and that our government was not there to help, that they didn't have anything to offer, that they didn't care about me or you or anyone else, that they had very different motives. And once that happened, it was a life-changing experience.